Hi, this is James with Rocketry Works. I want to give you a rundown today of the PML quick switch motor adapter system that comes in a lot of the PML kits like the AMRAAM 3 that we have here. And the key advantage to this is that right out of your kit you can fly either 54mm, 38mm, or 29mm motors, and by just simply swapping out one of these tubes that screws into the 54mm motor mount. So it's kind of a little tricky sometimes to make sure we get the alignment right on these and to really understand how it fits together. So that's the part I want to show you today. We're going to take some close-ups now of that aft end of the rocket. This kit has already been built, but we'll show you how to assemble these motor tubes and how to make sure to get the fit right, because really that's the key, is making sure these things come out the right length so that you can use any of the motors in your rocket in flight. So let's take a closer look. All right, close up. Okay, what you're gonna get out of the quick switch motor adapter kit, if you buy it separately, or this whole thing is gonna be included in the rocket kit for some of the kits you'll see from PML, like the AMRAAM 3 that we're working with today, is you get a tube, and it's a little confusing, the different parts, because they're all sort of packaged together like this. So let's unpack it, literally. You'll find inside, so this is going to be your 54mm motor tube, and in this case it's built into our AMRAAM 3. There's going to be centering rings to fit whatever kit you're trying to build to. If you buy the motor adapter system separately, you may have to make your own centering rings, but in the case of the AMRAAM 3 and the AMRAAM 4, it comes with them directly in the kit, so you've got the right rings for your rocket kit. So basically this is going to get built into the rocket. But before you do that, there's this ring here, and it's kind of tricky what they do. They've actually threaded the 29mm ring inside here. So you have to think to remove that first. And what you're left with is the ring that fits the 54mm, one that fits the 38, and one that fits the 29. And you can kind of see there are different dimensions. So the way these go together is you're going to wind up epoxying this ring, the big ring, inside the front of the 54mm tube. You're going to wind up installing that inside your rocket. I recommend you dry fit all this stuff first. That means just put it together just like this. Use some tape to hold it in if you need to, and that way you can make sure you understand everything that's going on. Just like your Russian doll set of rings, you've got your tubes in the same setup. So you've got your 29mm tube and your 38. Each of these tubes is going to get its appropriate ring glued onto the front. And you'll notice here it's a little bit different on the 29. It actually fits inside the innermost ring. These two rings are actually identical. So you're just going to glue them like this. You're going to have centering rings in the back, but again, don't do any gluing yet. You want to make sure that all this gets set up correctly. And it's great to work outside the rocket. No need to glue this inside the rocket at first, because what you're going to have is, in the end, this will get glued somewhere inside your rocket. But you want to know that these the motor system works the way you need it to. And really the key to that, and I'm going to switch up now, I'm going to pretend you can pretty much straight away go ahead and glue these in place. I would make sure that glue the center rings and the caps in place. I'm going to go ahead and compare these. Let's work with the 38mm just to keep it simple. I'm going to compare these with what my son built for his certification flight. Now you see that these do not come out exactly the same length, and that's okay. There's a fair bit of give in here. If nothing else, you can screw these in different amounts and that'll be all right. In my case, I would go ahead and glue this in. You could do it just like that, but just for the sake of consistency, let's line these up so they're basically the same position. And that looks about like that. So you can go ahead and glue that, but again, I'd take it first time and make sure it all fits right. You're then going to have your tube, and right now I'm just holding this in place. I can tell you this will have a tricky time staying in place if it's not glued, but there's nothing you can do wrong about that, so that's why I say you can go ahead and glue that in, or tape it if you're really paranoid. A little paranoia is a good thing. You're going to slide that in, and it's going to come up against the forward rings. Your rear centering ring is going to be fit inside the tube, and you're just going to screw this in. You can just screw it in with your fingers. It's not hard at all. It goes in super easy. It's going to get to a point, where it comes all the way into that tube. And if you look back at the other end, they're sized appropriately, so it's going to be sticking out a good amount, so that it's just going to be lined up right, so that when you put that motor in and then the motor retainer on there, it just works well. So for the sake of argument, let's switch up to the 54 millimeter mount that's already in here. So we slide this in. Now, with both centering rings inside the tube, I can tell I'm able to turn this so that it's secured inside. And again, I go all the way up. You're not going to like thread it through. It's going to hit rock bottom in there. Then you take your motor retainer. There's two sides to this adapter ring. One has a little bevel on it, and that is meant to fit toward the aft end of the retainer so that it centers the adapter inside the retainer. You need your 38 millimeter motor. You're going to screw this on, and at first that adapter is going to be rattling around a little bit. It's not going to want to be in the center. Right in the last steps, kind of wiggle that around. It's going to nest inside the motor retainer, and it's going to be nice and secure there. So that's how that motor adapter system winds up working. And the beauty of it is you can go and fly this on your 38 millimeter. Take your hot motor out. Unscrew this 38 millimeter and go ahead and pop your 29 in and go fly that. And it's really that simple. You just need to switch to the other adapter so that it will hold in your 29 millimeter motor. Screw that retainer on there to hold that in place. If you use the wrong size adapter, try testing that, try pulling that motor out. This one works well, but if you put the wrong one in there, or if you forget it entirely, screw that on with a 29 millimeter motor and a 38 millimeter retainer, and your motor will come right out, and that's what we don't want. So even though this stuff looks a little tricky, there's really not much trick to it. You simply want to position, there's no positioning on the front end, you simply glue that on. On the aft end, you want this positioned so that it is far enough from the end that it will fit inside the tube when you have this screwed even part way in. You pretty much want that to be inside the tube now, right at the time that I have touched rock bottom down here. If you've got it out here, it gets a little bit hard to start screwing that in straight, and you want to make sure it goes all the way in. But that's really all there is to it. It's a great system for doing that, and again, you can pretty much do, I'd take your time and just simply test fit it, use tape or whatever you need to make sure that you really understand how it all fits together. But with this system, I haven't seen a lot of problems. Another aspect of PML kits is that many of them use a piston or plunger system to protect the parachute from the hot ejection gases. And that way you don't need any recovery wadding or Nomex parachute protectors. You simply have one piece of webbing that's on the hot side of the piston, which is made of a phenolic coupler with a plywood bulkhead and a D-ring in it. And those two straps are actually connected through the D-ring. And you know what, the D-rings are often going to rotate around, and that's fine. And then on the upper end, you have a little more traditional tubular nylon shock cord connected to the upper airframe section with the parachute tied on. In this case, you'll see that we have kind of made a neater operation out of the shock cord management while we're on the ground here by wrapping tape around the shock cord just to bundle it up and make it more manageable. As soon as that shock cord takes some pressure, when the shock cord extends, that tape is going to rip right off, and it's a non-issue, but it makes it a lot easier to manage on the ground here rather than having this big tangle of stuff. So to load these up, the instructions are pretty clear, right? You connect up the lower shock cord through the bulkhead. You've already glued that bulkhead in place inside the coupler, and then you tie it, you loop it around and glue it inside. So that is fastened there, and then you tie the top shock cord on. When you are ready to prepare for flight, you simply tuck the lower shock cord in, slide your coupler in there. Sometimes it helps to have a child around who has nice skinny fingers that can fit in there. I'm going to use the 29mm motor adapter sleeve to help push this, the coupler down. It doesn't take much, but what we've done is we pushed that well down. It should slide pretty easily. It is worth cleaning up this rocket over time. If you're getting a lot of ejection charge buildup in there, it will be a little tricky to move that in there, but I find it's just easier to shove that all the way down. One word of advice: do this before you put your motor in, because if you've got your motor installed already, you're going to have a hard time getting, pushing enough air out around the motor to really get that piston in place. But once your piston is in there, again, you can put in your shock cord, take your parachute, slide it right in. It's protected by that bulkhead. And then simply slide it in. And I can feel air from the coupler here pushing out the vent hole that we have drilled in here. The vent hole is really only necessary if you're flying over maybe 5,000 feet above ground level. That's when your tube is going to pressurize sufficiently. You could very well start pushing your coupler apart while you're in flight. So a small vent hole will not prevent ejection. We're talking about a 1/4 inch on this 3-inch tube, and it will allow you to equalize pressure so that you don't separate prematurely. So that's what you've got when you're looking at the piston system. Another thing to think about for the piston system is you see on the aft end here, we have a standard rail button that goes through the wall and is anchored inside the motor mount. That, however, creates a mess inside, or not a mess, but a bump inside the airframe tube back there at the motor mount. That's all fine. Up here at the forward end, you cannot use a motor mount like that because you will catch that piston, and you won't be able to get the piston in or out, depending on which side you've trapped the piston. So we've used a conformal rail guide here, glued onto the outside of the airframe so that there's no obstruction inside the airframe here. And that allows that piston to eject. So that's one of the big tricks about this. You can't use a through-the-wall rail guide to secure that rail guide up front. You've got to use a conformal one that glues to the surface. So that's the other main trick to these PML kits. Otherwise, they're pretty much standard. You glue the fins on, always test fit everything before you use glue. Make sure you know just what you're doing. And if you don't, ask a question. We're always here to help support customers.